Two of the cables connecting Africa to the world broke and slowed down the internet in 13 countries. Welcome back to Plain English. Thanks for joining us this Thursday, February 20th, 2020. I'm Jeff. JR, the producer, is with us too, behind the controls. And this is episode number 235. So check out plainenglish.com/235 for all of today's episode resources. Coming up today, the ocean floor is crisscrossed with fiber-optic cables connecting the continents to one another. And two of the biggest cables serving Africa broke in January, slowing the internet for hundreds of millions of users. The expression today is slow to a crawl. You might be able to guess the context of that one. And JR has a song of the week. The video lesson today talks about how to identify an exception to a broad general statement. What can you say when you want to make a generalization, but then identify an exception to the rule? That's the topic of today's video lesson at plainenglish.com/235. We don't think too much about the inner workings of the internet, the basic plumbing that connects phones, computers, and servers around the world. That is, until things go wrong. About a dozen sub-Saharan African nations saw their internet service slow to a crawl in late January after two undersea cables serving the continent unexpectedly broke. The massive cables laid along the ocean floor connect Africa to servers in Europe and, by extension, to the rest of the world. The West Africa cable system connects South Africa with London, with individual connections to the countries along Africa's western coast, plus Portugal. Cable breaks are a fact of life in the modern world, and they vary in severity. This one was bad. A cable break between Europe and North America, for example, would only affect traffic going between the two continents. But Europe and North America have extensive networks of local servers and content that doesn't need to cross the oceans, so the impact would be limited to intercontinental traffic. Africa is a different story. Because Africa doesn't have as much internet infrastructure as, say, Europe or North America, a rupture in the undersea cables can have an outsized impact on businesses and consumers, since so much data is needed from elsewhere. The largest economy affected was South Africa, but 12 other countries, including Ghana, the Ivory Coast, and Cameroon, were also affected. Internet users in some countries were unable to send simple email messages, web browsing was heavily curtailed, and online banking transactions were interrupted. Telecoms providers in Africa came under fire for the slow speeds, but there was little they could do. Local internet companies are reliant on the undersea cables for all their service. Almost every popular provider in Africa was affected to one degree or another. Telecoms companies in each country typically lease capacity from much larger companies that own the interoceanic cables. Fortunately, Local service providers also guard against outages by leasing backup capacity on other large cables, but the backup capacity is much less robust than the primary cable. Had the break occurred 15 or 20 years ago, there would have been no backup, and Africa might have been totally cut off from the global internet. Cables can break for any number of reasons, most of them man-made. Fishing trawlers, which scrape the bottom of the sea, are a primary cause. Cables can break from ships dragging their anchors. They can simply malfunction as they reach the end of their useful lives, or they can break as a result of natural causes. In this case, two main cables serving Africa broke, both in the same geographic area, leading technicians to believe that the cause was natural rather than man-made. The breaks happened in the Congo Canyon, a massive underwater canyon near the mouth of the Congo River on Africa's Atlantic coast. Repair of these cables is no easy task, as you might imagine. A repair ship first has to locate the break and mark the spot with a buoy, a floating marker in the ocean. They then drop a long cable with a claw on the end and try to reel up the first end of the broken cable, and then the second end. Teams on board the ship repair the break, test it, seal it up again, and drop the cable down to the ocean floor. It takes several days just to locate the break, then a week or longer to make the repairs. When repair crews examined the broken cables earlier this month, they saw that they had been burned out, the result of a short circuit. They identified two possibilities. Intense rains had caused the Congo River to flood in recent weeks. The flooded river deposited a mountain of sediment in the Atlantic near the coast. Pressure on the cables from the sediment might have caused the cables to short circuit. Scientists also identified a geothermal event, in other words, a small underwater volcanic eruption in that area, which could have been the cause as well. The first cable was repaired 2 days ahead of schedule, and high-speed service in Africa was partially restored. Would you like to know a crazy fact? How thick do you think those cables have to be to carry all the internet traffic for an entire continent? I was picturing these massive cables about as wide across as a person standing up, just a huge, thick cable taking massive amounts of data. The diameter of a typical undersea cable is 1 inch. The cable coming into my house is like half an inch, but a 1-inch cable carries the internet traffic for a continent. It's crazy what they can fit on fiber optic lines. Thanks so much to all of you who have taken our listener survey. If you haven't had a chance to do that, and if you want your voice to be heard, then please visit plainenglish.com/survey, SURVEY. It's just a few questions, some where you select an answer, but others are more open-ended so you can practice your writing a little. I read every single response, and we've gotten hundreds of responses so far. So make your voice count in our listener survey. Go to plainenglish.com/survey. I'm going to give you a little bit of a break today with an easy expression. I think I've been giving you hard ones lately. This one is just a good one to know, and that is to slow to a crawl. First of all, let's define the word crawl. The easiest way to describe this word is to say, this is what a baby does before he or she can walk. You have to crawl before you can walk. That's another good English expression. When something slows to a crawl, it slows down a lot. And we almost always use this with something that is normally fast. And of course, how did you hear it in today's main lesson? You heard that internet service in sub-Saharan Africa slowed to a crawl after the undersea cables connecting Africa to Europe were broken. The internet, which is usually fast, slowed to a crawl. It slowed down dramatically. It was much, much slower after the cable break than before. Another very, very common way to use this expression is when you're talking about traffic on the highway. Remember, you use this when something is normally fast. So if you live on a quiet street, you would never say that traffic slowed to a crawl on your street because traffic doesn't go that fast to begin with. Instead, we say that traffic on major highways slows to a crawl. For example, traffic on I-90 slowed to a crawl after a 3-car pileup closed the right 2 lanes. Normally, traffic on that road goes about 60 miles per hour or about 100 kilometers per hour. But after a 3-car pileup, after a crash involving 3 cars, the 2 right lanes were closed and all the traffic had to fit in just 1 remaining lane. That meant that traffic, normally around 60 miles per hour, was down to only 15 miles per hour for a few miles. Ouch! Traffic slowed to a crawl. It was fast, and then it was much slower. Another thing that can slow to a crawl is progress. Our progress slowed to a crawl after half the team got sick and missed work. Let's hope that's not true this flu season. What's another example with progress? How about negotiations? I don't know how it is where you live, but here in the U.S., some industries like auto manufacturing, professional sports teams, and hotels have labor unions, and the unions negotiate a contract for all their workers. When a contract is about to expire, they start to negotiate on a new contract. Sometimes those are easy negotiations, sometimes not so much. If both sides have made a lot of progress, if things are looking good, but then there's one sticking point in the negotiations that causes progress to slow down, you might say that negotiations have slowed to a crawl. Here's what you might say. We made fast progress on a number of important issues, but negotiations slowed to a crawl when we began talking about healthcare benefits. That means that when they got to the topic of healthcare benefits, the two sides could not make progress like they could on all the other topics. Negotiations slowed to a crawl. Trade between two countries can slow to a crawl. Trade between China and the rest of the world has slowed to a crawl recently as the country deals with the aftermath of the coronavirus. In Great Britain, they were worried that trade with the EU would slow to a crawl after Brexit. That didn't happen since they have an interim trade agreement that lasts a year. But in a year's time, trade may still slow to a crawl if they don't negotiate a more permanent trade agreement. The song of the week is Running Up That Hill by Meg Myers. It's a cover of a song originally out in 1985. According to Meg, it's a song about two people who are in love, but she says the power of love is almost too big for them. It leaves them feeling very insecure and in fear of losing each other. The song of the week is Running Up That Hill by Meg Myers. And if you'd like to nominate a song of the week, just email jr@plainenglish.com. That's all for today's episode. It's great to have you here as always. Coming up on Monday, it's the return of a popular episode type, the destination in the English-speaking world. We pick one popular destination and tell you all about it. In past episodes, we talked about Toronto, we talked about Mumbai, and for the third installment in this popular series, we'll talk about a popular destination in the United States. Remember, if you haven't filled out our listener survey yet, there's still time to make your voice heard as JR and I plan improvements to the website in the future. Just visit us at plainenglish.com/survey, plainenglish.com/survey.